Hey guys, thanks for clicking in today and watching this video. Again, I really appreciated your guys' support in this podcast thing. Eric and I are pretty ecstatic for all three of you guys that listen to our videos. I'm pretty proud of our work. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I talked to Eric a couple weeks ago, and I want to do something personal that affected me, and I got his full support. So October 30th, 2025 marks the 1-year anniversary of my son Matthew's death. Matthew was my youngest son, and I want to talk about what I've gone through in the past year, with the trauma, of losing a child. Yeah, I'm not looking for sympathy or anything like that. That's not why I did this video. I figure if I share some of the things I went through, and maybe, a lot of you guys can relate to what I went through, and just give you an idea of how I got through this year. So again, my son Matthew was the youngest of, I got another son. And during this video, I'll probably, air out some of my, family dynamics or lack thereof. And I don't want you to take that the wrong way. Yeah, when any kind of conflict with people and family and stuff like that, there's always two sides of a story, and I'm going to give you my side of the story. And people who know my family members, you can ask them for their side, which I totally respect. So I haven't talked to my oldest son since 2018, but Matthew has always, just like any father-son relationship, there's been heartache there and disagreements. But I think at the time, the last few years, we've had a pretty great relationship. He was a sweet kid, and had his stuff together. Obviously, he had his hiccups, like everybody else does. But he was a good kid, and I loved him very much. I love both my sons very much. But this has been a rough year, and we've gone through a lot of issues. Issues that I've had in the past have kind of escalated this year. I think mainly because of the heartache, the trauma, whatever you want to label it, that I've gone through with losing a son. I've gone through the full spectrum of emotions, being sad, upset, to anger management issues, and I've dealt with anxiety and panic disorder, in the past. Not so much, where it was debilitating, but this year has been pretty rough. Been hospitalized a couple times, because of anxiety. That's how bad it got. At times I couldn't breathe. Got real claustrophobic, and obviously it was enough to say, I think I need to go to the emergency room and figure this out. So I'm going to kind of give you a timeline of what happened to Matthew back early 2023. He went on a road trip to Vegas. He played a lot of pool, and he decided to drive, with a couple of his friends. And he got back a couple weeks after he got back. He was on his way to work, and he can barely make it out the door trying to breathe. So he smart enough to, go to the hospital and try to figure this out. Typical, millennial, I didn't hear from him. I didn't talk to Matthew on a day-to-day basis. We talk maybe once a week. If that, it's just your typical relationship with an adult child. I try to talk to him as much as possible. Yeah. But those with adult children who hear from him every now and then, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But he was in the hospital for a full 3 days, And, I finally talked to him, asked him how things were going. And he tells me, yeah, don't freak out, but I've been in a hospital for 3 days now. Of course, I'm just like, what are you talking about? He tells me, he's got some heart issues. And of course, with my medical history, I've had heart issues in the past. So I was asking him all these questions. And of course, he didn't know. I'm sure the doctors told him what was going on. And so from that point on, I started going with him to his medical appointment. Got him a cardiologist, and it came down to he needed a quadruple bypass because his body didn't get rid of cholesterol as fast as everybody else, whether it be genetic, lifestyle, but his cholesterol was not going down. I mean, it was just building up and building up. And for those of you who know anything about cardiovascular health, cholesterol is pretty much what causes your arteries to get blocked and causes heart attacks, strokes. So, we went through, a bunch of doctor's visits, spoke to a couple cardiologists, and finally, the cardiologist, we finally said, and he's like, we're going to have to do surgery. And, that's rough, especially for somebody that was only 35 years old. Hey, you're going to go in there and they're going to open you up and mess around with your cardiovascular system and patch you up. So I knew that played heavy on him. He was kind of worried about it. He didn't really show it much, but I could just tell that he was going through some problems. So March of 2023, he went in for his bypass surgery, and everything was great. Surgery went well, and doctor came out. The staff there was top notch. I mean, they were giving us updates. They were texting me during the surgery. They even sent me photos, which is good and bad. It's like, okay, and it was just a rough time. I think I was more scared than he was. His mother was there. Lisa was there, just during this whole process when he had his surgery. After his surgery, he moved it back in with his mom because his mom was home most of the time. I'm kind of keep an eye on him, during his therapy, and I came by the house to go for walks with him because he had to get up and move around. And obviously he's got he's got the big scar on his chest, from where they cut him open. So it was, sorry, this is hard to talk about, but it came down to, he had to change his lifestyle around. He was going out every night, he was playing a lot of pool. He wasn't a big drinker. He did smoke. So we obviously had to quit smoking and, pick up vaping or whatever. I know he smoked weed. To me, that's not a big deal, but, whatever. But that was one of the things he was doing, smoking. Probably wasn't good for his health condition. But it's hard to tell somebody in their 30s, hey, listen, you need to straighten out. It wasn't easy for me when I quit smoking and switched to vaping or whatever. And so it was a difficult time. And he was watching what he ate. Probably didn't work out as much as he should have been, going to the gym like he was supposed to. And that's where a lot of the turmoil comes in my head. Maybe I should have gone on him a little bit more about, hey, let's go work out. I was just starting a new job at the university. So my time was taken up, and it was just hard to get together because of my hours. And that's something I had to deal with. Should I have gotten on more? But it got to a point where I decided I didn't want to have every conversation with him be about, hey, you need to get your shit together. You need to stop eating like crap. You need to stop going out every night. You need to slow it down. and all this. So that went on, for a good part of a year. And then obviously October 2024, I'm on my way to work and I'm in Evanston. So that's about, at the time I have to go, I have to be at work at 2. So I usually leave my house around 12:30. It takes about an hour to get up there. And Matthew lived in Glendale Heights, so which is right from close to where I start out my day. I live in Villa Park, and it's about a 20-minute drive from where I'm at, a little bit further west. The reason I'm telling you is kind of give you a time frame. I'm on my way to work that day, and I get a phone call from somebody he works with saying, "Hey, Mr. Bongat, Matthew didn't show up for work, and we've been unable to reach him." So figure, well, he was probably out late last night. I wasn't worried too much about it till I actually got to the station. And then I started, worrying a little bit more. So I called his roommate, say, "Hey, did you see Matthew this morning?" She was like, "No, I talked to him last night." I knew he was in his room working on something, but I did talk to him last night. And I told her the story. I was like, "Hey, listen, work's been calling. He didn't show up and he's not answering his phone." So she told me, she was like, "Well, I'm going to reach out to him because he always answers my calls or answers my texts right away." I get a call back maybe 10 minutes later. She's like, "Yeah, I'm going to go to the house because he's not answering my texts." Of course, she gets home and, she calls me and she's crying and I just knew what happened. And when she said she was on her way home to check because he hasn't been answering, that's when I was really stressing out. Went to the locker room. I just knelt down and prayed in front of my locker. And I was, pleading with God. Don't put me through this. Let this be a misunderstanding, or, he lost his frickin' phone. And I'll tell you, as far as prayer, this isn't a video to try to turn you to God or anything like that. I'm far from grace. I'm not going to be pushed to the front of the line when I go get into heaven and stuff. I'll be the first one to admit that. But up until that point, God was batting 1,000 for me. With my own personal health issues, I'd pray, and then I'd get a good diagnosis. Everything was all right. When before Matthew went in for his heart surgery, I went to the chapel and I prayed. And after the surgery, I prayed, to thank God, for seeing him through this. So he has answered my prayers. And that's what I meant. He was batting 1,000. Till this day. And it took me a while to get past that afterwards. Anger. I didn't go to church for a while. I didn't want to think about church for a long time. Again, I'm just talking about the trauma that I've been through. So it was a hard time. So of course, his roommate tells me, found him in his room on the floor. She's already called the police. So now I'm rushing from Evanston. I change out of my uniform, let everybody know what's going on. Obviously, they kind of figured it out because I broke down in my office. And with traffic, it probably took me an hour and a half. And honestly, that was probably the longest hour and a half of my life because I didn't know what to do. Called Lisa. I called my brother. I called his mother, and she didn't believe me what was going on. She had hung up on me, and I called her back, and her husband called me, and I told him what was going on. I just kept saying, I'm on my way there. I'm on my way there. I'm trying to figure this out, but he's gone. In my career, I've made tons of death notifications. We have to actually call somebody up or go knock on the door and say, hey, are you the parents of so-and-so? Yeah, unfortunately, he's dead. And now when it came to my personal, I was just confused on how to deal with all that. Obviously, my emotions were running high on that drive home. I was zipping in and out of cars. Surprised I didn't get pulled over. So I get there, and Lisa had met me there. The police were already there. I get there, and Lisa and his roommate, I'm sure, told the police officers that I was a police officer and that I'm on my way. So they had a couple patrol officers out front, and just giving me their condolences. And, I knew what they were going to want. They're going to want to get all my information and all that stuff. I gave it to them. Had a couple detectives downstairs. One of them came up, and I was talking to him, and I just told him, I was like, I got to see my son. I was like, I get well over dozens of death investigations under me. I need to see my son. And they were gracious enough to arrange that. They told me, exactly what I would have said is like, listen, the medical exam, or in DuPage County, it's the coroner. The coroner's coming out to look everything over. And when they get here, we'll talk to them and we'll square things away, which they did. Coroner came there, did their thing. During this time, my brother had showed up. And he was there. And here's the thing, he had asked me, did you call Chris, which is my other son? Now, this is 2024. I haven't talked to my son, Chris, since 2018. I didn't think it was my place to call him because I've reached out to him before and he hasn't called me back. Mm-hmm. And before this happened, every now and then I would ask Matthew, hey, have you heard from your brother? Because obviously, Chris is my son. I love him. I know he doesn't want anything to do with me. I still care about him. I want to make sure he's doing okay. And Matthew, one time I asked Matthew if he heard from him, how he's doing. And he goes, actually, I called him before my surgery. Say, hey, listen, I'm gonna be in having this big procedure tomorrow. Just to give you a heads up. And the one thing that my son Matthew told me is like, yeah, but I never heard from him. So that stuck in my head during my thought process. As soon as my brother said, hey, did you call Chris? And I said, no. Why should I call him? I haven't talked to him since 2018. So, of course, he runs out of the house to give him a call. He comes back in and he's like, oh, yeah, he's on his way. And I was, for what? They're going to pull his body out of here as soon as the coroner is done. There's no reason for him to be here. Because I certainly didn't want to see him. So just to give you I just wanted to kind of give you the context of what was going on that day and all the different things that I had to deal with. When I was thinking about putting this video together, I was just like, okay, I'm going to explain what happened, only because now you fast forward, to calling people and posting on his social media, letting his friends know, hey, Matthew's gone. one of those, sorry to, regretfully, Matthew has passed away and so on. And as soon as I get any details, I'll put it out there. Of course, the phone calls started coming in. The text messages started coming in. And the reason I talked about what exactly happened, as far as his heart problems and the day he died, is because that question came up quite a bit. What happened? What happened? What happened? I can understand family members calling me, and a lot of my close friends calling me and asking me, hey, what happened? Are you all right? And a lot of them didn't. They were just concerned about me. Hey, are you okay? I'm sorry that happened. A lot of my close friends didn't ask me what happened, which is fine because I didn't want to talk about what happened. What bothered me was people that I haven't talked to in years or months, or not even in my inner circle, calling me, hey, what happened? I'm like, who are you? You know what I mean? Now, I didn't say that. I just came up with a default answer that, Matthew had some heart problems. And I left it at that. But I remember being at the wake and people that were there, for me, they were contacts of mine to come there for support, which I appreciate. But I didn't necessarily like these people, some of them. And they were asking me what happened. And it took everything in me just not to punch these people in the throat. I was pretty upset with that. And it took everything in me not to cause a scene or raise my voice at my son's wake. He got a lot of support from his friends. The place was full of his friends. Matthew made a pretty big impact in lives that he touched. Heard a lot of good stories about him and so on. And to add to my drama, so I haven't talked to my brother and sister much for years. My brother I talk to every now and then. My sister I haven't talked to since 2018 as well. And which kind of makes you wonder, because I've done a lot of self-reflection. When it comes to my immediate family members, my brother, sister, my parents are both gone. My oldest son, so it's my brother, sister, and my oldest son. Those are the only biological family members I have left, besides cousins and stuff, but immediate family. And I'm the common denominator in that, meaning I'm the one person that doesn't get along with the rest of the family. So I've done a lot of self-reflection on that, and this is why when I say I'm not taking jabs at my family members, I'm just explaining my family dynamic there, because there's always two sides of a story. So if you want to find out why I'm the jerk off, you would have to understand, because like I said, I don't know what I've done to be where I'm at today when it comes to my family members. So going back to, having to tell people what happened, it was just brutal, just what happened. When a friend of mine, if somebody I know and one of their family members passes away, I don't think I can bring myself to ask, hey, what happened? It's not my place. You want to tell me, or if it's posted somewhere on social media, I'll get the story from there, or I'll get it from someone else. But I know this person's going through some traumatic stuff. I'm not going to bug them with having to tell me, I'm not going to bug them for story time. Let me know what happened. I didn't really want to talk about this stuff. It was kind of overwhelming. But during this whole process, I know I've been kind of bashing my family. I did get a lot of support from from my family members. Lisa was great. I think she knew not to like hover around me. She's not one of those people that just, you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Because because I'd sit there and I catch myself like lost in thought, and I'm just thinking about stuff. Not upset at that moment, but I have a lot on my mind, obviously. His mother and her family were there. My ex-wife flew in from Arizona to help out, which I thought was great. Obviously my friends, they were checking on me, obviously, and it was just, I got a lot of support. Again, sometimes it was overwhelming. I didn't want to be a sympathy case. I mean, I don't want to be a sympathy case now. That's not why I'm making this video. But, I didn't want to be a sympathy case. It's like, okay, like some friends were calling me and I was like, dude, I haven't heard from you in months. Now you're checking in on me every week. I kind of get it. But then because of this is this is how my mind works. It's just like it's stuck in my head. You're only checking on me because you feel bad for me. And I didn't want people to feel bad. Which is, kind of, I try to learn from everything that's happened to me and, use that in my life later on. But it was rough during that time frame. So something I've learned, a new piece of advice I now give people is be careful about what support you offer. Because I do the same thing. When somebody I know goes through a loss, because of death or whatever, a lot of times I won't call them because the day it happens, they're inundated, they're busy with family stuff. They're making arrangements. They're obviously grieving. I know I was, I didn't really want to talk to anybody. So I put myself in their place and just like, so I usually just send a text. Hey, listen, you need something. Don't hesitate to call me or reach out if you need something. And that's my standard text. And I'm not trying to take anything away from that message, even though it's like my default message. I really mean, when I send somebody a message, hey, call me if you need anything, I will, do the best I can to help them out to the best of my ability. Whether it's, you want to talk to me, shoot the shit, whatever. Because a lot of times that's what I wanted. I mean, I didn't want to talk about my problems, but I wouldn't mind talking to somebody just to clear my head, just talk about trivial stuff. And I've always tried to keep that in mind. And it was I was reminded of that because I wanted to give you an example. This is what this conversation was leading up to, as far as be careful what you offer up. Is a couple of weeks ago, Elise was going out with her cousin to have dinner. So I was left to my own for a dinner. I was off, didn't have work. It was a Sunday. I was like, oh, you know what? Let's see who wants to hang out for dinner or something. I got to figure something out. Otherwise, I was going to stay home and eat something here. But, I don't go out. I'm not, my clubbing days are well behind me. I'm not a big drinker. I don't go to the bars every weekend, or I don't go to the bars at all unless there's a function going on with some of my friends. Granted, it was about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I must have sent out 5 messages. Say, hey, if you don't have dinner plans, let me know. I was going to hit up this Mexican place close by my house. And all 5 of them had something else to do. Now, this was a couple of weeks ago. So to kind of put things in perspective, the last few weeks have been rough because I knew this day was coming. The anniversary of my son. Don't get me wrong, I think about my son every day, but the closer I got to this anniversary date, it was just, I knew it was going to be more and more of a bigger reminder of my son is actually gone. Did I want to talk about that? My problems, how upset I am, or how angry I am about, lack of action on my part, or no, I didn't want to talk about that stuff. I just wanted to go out and eat and just have somebody there to talk to, about anything but that. But of course, guys, life happens, oh yeah, we already have dinner plans, or, we already started cooking something for dinner, or I'm running around, I got errands to run and stuff like that. Which I understand. Am I mad at these guys? Absolutely not. That wasn't the point of my story. I'm not upset or angry with any of them. It's just, it made me think, so now I know if somebody calls me and say, hey, I'm going to go grab something to eat, I kind of have to sit there and think, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Especially if I haven't talked to this person in a while and, they reach out and, hey, you want to have a drink? Now I'm going to have to really sit there and it's like, oh shit, you know what? I offered that up. Hey, if you ever need somebody to talk to or whatever, hit me up. And I think, like myself, most people are the same. They're not going to say, hey, I'm fucked up in the head. I don't want to be by myself right now. Do you want to come hang out with me? I would never say that. Again, I don't want to be a sympathy case. It's like, oh, man. Hey, listen, I got to go hang out with Ron because he's all fucked up as a head. Cancel our dinner plans. I don't want any of that. And that's not what I was going for. So again, I just be careful what you offer up. So this past year, obviously, I've had to make some adjustments. And again, the reason I put this video together is hopefully it hits home with somebody and maybe something I'm going through, touches on your life, things that you're going through as well. And maybe the way I've dealt with it, hopefully, you can use the same thing, or I'm just trying to be helpful. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I probably should have put that disclaimer at the beginning of this video. Closest I've gotten is just, being part of the peer support program at my previous department. But so obviously I mentioned it before, I deal with a lot of anxiety now and lack of sleep. Sleep is brutal. My mind will race. So when I hit my head hits the pillow, I don't automatically fall asleep. I'm stuck. And I used to bring my iPad to bed and just watch random mindless videos to kind of just clear my head. I don't do that anymore. Now I switch back to reading books. And the books I read are usually fiction. I didn't read a lot of James Patterson or David Baldacci. It's just my preference. And I like reading those series. But I don't watch the iPad anymore because sometimes there'll be other videos in the links, for something, whether it's political or anti-government or something. And then, then I get angry and stuff because I do notice like my anger does shoot up a lot quicker than it did before. Not that I have like horrendous outbursts of anger at any point. I'm still the same person. I don't take it out on anybody. I'm not overtly aggressive at work with anybody. It's a different environment in law enforcement now. You can't be that way. But in my head, I do have like a lot of anger management issues. So I'm trying to stay cognizant of that. along the lines of anxiety and sleep, I'm trying to change my lifestyle around a little bit. Again, with the, no more videos at the end of the night, just stick with my book. And then I've also given up afternoon coffee. So my work starts at 2 p.m. So my normal routine was to, do roll call and then go to the Starbucks and grab some espresso. So I've stopped doing that, which was hard at the beginning. But it was just to prepare myself for 8 hours later when I come home and try to get some sleep. So I did away with that. I did seek out, and I'm still going to. I do go to counseling now. I don't know if that really helps, per se, because I know why I'm upset. I know why I have anxiety. And then I think I've watched enough YouTube videos to learn how to deal with that stuff. I go to the gym a lot, try to stay healthy. And so the counseling, I don't know what that's doing for me. I'll tell you one thing though, counseling, I think works out a little bit for me is because I get to say these things out loud to somebody who has no idea who I am. And hearing these things come out of my mouth sometimes makes me think of things different about how I feel about it, or I'll say something that upset me. And then hearing it out loud, I'm like, why the fuck am I even upset about it? Like my family members. Yeah, I wish I was closer with my family. Who doesn't? Who doesn't want a relationship with their son? I've reached out. I've tried. Late last year, because I again, just because I don't talk to him doesn't mean I try to make sure he's not okay. And he's doing this whole stand-up comedy thing. And then, of course, I come across one of his videos where he pretty much says how he, really hates his father, and he's talking about that. So obviously that made me feel pretty good. But, I made a conscious decision, a couple of years ago when I was telling Lisa about this. I said this time and time again. I'm not chasing people around for relationships anymore. I'm 55 now. I have, with, some health problems, and I'm trying to stay healthy. But, I have this much stuff I want to do, or this much stuff I want to accomplish, but I only have this much time left. So I have to prioritize what I want to get done. Is family on the top of my priority? Of course it is. But if I've already reached out and I'm not getting anything reciprocated there, then why am I bothering? Why am I wasting my energy on it? So again, talking to a counselor about certain things like that, and hearing this stuff out loud kind of helps in a sense that, why am I fucking upset about this? Fuck it, I tried. You know what I mean? So I don't know what else I can do. I'm not begging somebody to be part of my life. Going back to peer support, the old adage that they would tell you all the time is, it's okay to be not okay, which is true. There's nothing wrong with needing help or having some issues going on in your life that's overwhelming. Yeah, no, that's true. It's okay. Everybody goes through it. If they say they're not, they're lying to you. I have a pretty good job. We're pretty financially stable. We're very grateful for my lot in life. What God has provided me. I'm thankful. I still pray and thank God for all that stuff. I still have problems. A couple of years ago, I've read a couple books. One of them is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I know a lot of you guys have read that book. My former deputy chief made sergeants read that book when they made sergeant because it was part of his required reading at the FBI Academy or whatever. And then there was another book called Don't Believe Everything Your Mind Tells You. And pretty much these books, I mean, the common theme is, your emotions like sadness, anger, it's controlled by you. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to be upset. These are things that are brought upon by obviously external factors. But if you sit there and think about it, you can sit there and not give a shit and not be angry and not care. And I do a pretty good job at some of that stuff. Whether I'm at work wearing a uniform and someone's jacking their jaw at the protest, in my face, and that stuff doesn't bother me. Do I think these people are freaking idiots? Yeah, I do, but I'm not upset. It doesn't affect my life. And I think that's what the book is telling you, is you can not feel these certain ways. But I'm not going to lie. This is hard not to think about. Losing my son and not being able to talk to him when I want to or see what he's got going on, that bothers me a lot. So I'm not trying to take the value of these books away from anybody. I mean, they are good books, but it's still hard. But I do think counseling, does work in that way, where it can, not everything's bottled up in my head. I mean, I say these things out loud, and my counselor, she doesn't know who I am. You know what I mean? And confidentiality, just can't repeat anything I say. Not that I got anything weird to fucking tell her, but I think saying them out loud kind of helps. So I hope this, kind of helps people out there who've gone through some loss. And, been a long year, and again, it's kind of a brutal thing to go through. I don't wish this on anybody. I had a great relationship, and I miss my son, Matthew. And it's probably one of the hardest things I've had to deal with. Yeah, you go back to, funerals and wake etiquette, about, what happened? What happened? When your parents die, you're staying at your wake. Nobody asks why your parents died. They just know that when they were old. It's just a part of life. When you lose a son, it's different. It's a different dynamic. Because you have people coming out of the woodworks asking, what happened? What happened? And I hope that kind of changes your mindset about showing your support to your friends. God forbid they lose a child. Because in my case, that's not something I wanted to share with a lot of people. I luckily I did come up with a default answer, so I wouldn't have to go in. Because there were a few people that just kept going on and on about it. He had heart problems. When did that start? Oh, was he smoking? Was he doing this? Was he doing that? And in my head, I'm saying, get the fuck away from me. But obviously, I didn't do it. I did. I don't really want to talk about it. Again, so, and I didn't want to leave here thinking, that my relationship with God is, screwed up. It's not. I know God has a plan for everybody. Whether you work out or not, take care of yourselves or not, I know He's got a plan, and I'm trying to make amends with that, and it's harder and harder. Please don't blast me in the comments about how I can find God and stuff like that. I'm working on my relationship with God. I don't need reminders that I need to do that. But I appreciate you guys if you made it this far in the video, listening to me, and listen. You got kids, hug on your kids, man. Love them. Hang out with them as long as for as long as they want to hang out with you. I think that's one of my biggest flaws in my life, or how I see myself as, my success in life. I failed in a lot of areas, and family, I think, is one of them. And I'm not claiming to be, hey, listen, I was the best father to these guys, or no, I'm not making those claims. I'm not perfect. I was not a perfect father, but I love my sons. I love my brother and sister. I love my family. So, well, I hope this video helped anybody who's gone through the same thing I've gone. And again, thank you again. The Asian American Perspective's got a couple more episodes before we start our new season. And hopefully you guys will continue to support what Eric and I got. Thanks for clicking in and listening on my thoughts, and hope it helps. You guys take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys next time.